Book 15. Jove, waking and beholding Troy in flight, chides Juno, sends Iris to the fight, to charge the sea-god, to forsake the field, and Phoebus to invade it with his shield, recovering Hector's bruised and erased powers. To field he goes and makes new conquerors. Trojans giving now the Grecians chase, even to their fleet. Then Ajax turns his face and feeds with many Trojan lives his ire, who then brought brands to set the fleet on fire. Jove sees, in his oversight, chides Juno, Neptune calls from fight. The Trojans beat past Pale and Dyke, and numbers prostrate laid, all got to chariot, fear driven all on fear as men dismayed. Then Jove on Ida's top awaked, rose from Saturnia's side, stood up and looked upon the war, and all inverted spied, since he had seen it, the Ilians now in rout, the Greeks in fight. King Neptune with his long sword chief, great Hector, put down quite, laid flat in field, and with a crown of princes compassed, to so stopped up that the scarce could breathe, his mind's sound habit fled. He still spitting blood indeed, his head was not set on by one that was the weakest Greek, but him Jove looked upon with eyes of pity on his wife with horrible aspect, to whom he said, O thou an ill most cunning architect, all arts and comments that exceedst not, only to enforce Hector from fight, but with his men to show the Greeks a course. I fear, as formerly, so now these ills have with thy hands their first fruits sown, and therefore could load all thy limbs with bands, forgetst thou when I hanged thee up, how to thy feet I tied 2 anvils, golden manacles, and on thy false wrists implied, and let thee mercilessly hang from our refined heaven, even to earth's vapours, all the gods and great Olympus given to mutinies about thee, yet though all stood staring on, none durst dissolve thee, for these hands had they burst but seized upon. Thy friend had headlong thrown him off from our star-bearing round, till he had tumbled at his breath and piecemeal dashed the ground. Nor was my angry spirit calmed so soon as for those foul seas on which, inducing northern flaws, thou shipwrecked Hercules, and tossed him to the cone shore, that thou hast should tempt again my wrath importance, when thou seest, besides, how grossly vain my powers can make thy policies. For from their utmost force I freed my son, and set him safe in Argos, nurse of horse. These I remember to thy thoughts, that thou mayst shun these slights, and know her badly bed sports thrive, procured by base deceits. This frighted the offending queen, who with this state accused her kind unkindness. Witness earth and heaven so far diffused, thou flood whose silent gliding ways the underground doth bear, which is the greatest and gravest oath that any god can swear, thy sacred head, those secret joys that our young bed gave forth, by which I never rashly swore that he who shakes the earth, not by my counsel did this wrong to Hector and his host, but pitying the oppressed Greeks, their fleet being nearly lost, relieved their hard condition, yet utterly impelled by his free mind, which since I see is so offensive held. To thy high pleasure I will now advise him not to tread, but where thy tempest raising feet, O Jupiter, shall lead. Jove laughed to hear her so submiss, and said, My fair-eyed love, if still thus thou and I were one, and counsels held above, Neptune would still in word and fact be ours, if not in heart. Then thy tongue and heart agree from hence to heaven depart, to call the excellent in bows, the rainbow and the sun. That both dismay both the hosts, the Grecian army one, and that is Iris. Let her haste, and make the sea gods cease to assist the Greeks, and to his court retire for more in peace. Let Phoebus on the Trojan part inspire the wonted power. Great Hector's spirits make his thoughts forget the late stern hour, and all his anguish setting on his whole recovered man, to make good his late grace in fight, and hold in constant wane the Grecian glories till they fail in flight before the fleet of vex Achilles, which extreme will prove the mean to greet thee with thy wish, for then the eyes of great Diacides, made witness of the general ill that doth so near him prease, will make his own particular look at, and by degrees abate his wrath, that, though himself for no extremities will seem reflected, yet his friend may get him of the grace to help his country in his arms, and he shall make fit place for his full presence with his death, which shall be well forerun, for I will first renown his life with slaughter of my son, divine Sarpedon, and his death great Hector's power shall wreak, ending his ends. Then at once out shall the fury break of fierce Achilles, and with that the flight now felt shall turn, and then at last, till in the wrathful flames the long siege Iliad burn. Minerva's counsel shall become grave, mean to this my will, which no god shall neglect, before Achilles make his fill of slaughter for his slaughter's friend, even Hector's slaughter throne. Under his anger, that these facts may then make fully known, my vast performance made of late, with my bowed head, confirmed to Thetis when her arms embraced my knees and prayed, that to her city-raising son I would all honour show. This heard his charge she seemed intend, and to Olympus flew. But as the mind of such a man that hath the great way gone, and either knowing not his way, or then would then let alone, his purpose journey is distract, and in his vexed mind resolves now not to go, now goes, still many ways inclined. So reverend Juno headlong flew, against his stomach strived. For being amongst the immortal gods in high heaven soon arrived, all rising, welcoming with cups her little absence thence, she all their courtships overpassed with solemn negligence, save that which fair-cheeked Themis showed, and her kind cup she took. For first she ran and met with her, and asked what troubled luck she brought to heaven. She thought for truth that Jove had terrified her spirit strangely since she went. The fair-armed queen replied, that truth may easily be supposed. You, goddess Themis, know his old severity and pride, but you can't bear to show. Like the banquet's arbiter, amongst the immortals fair, thou well you hear amongst them all how bad his actions are. Nor are all here, or anyway mortals nor gods, I fear, entirely pleased with what he does, though thus see banquet here. Thus took she place, displeasedly, she the feast, in general bewraying privy spleens at Jove, and then to colour all she laughed, but merely from her lips, for over her black brows her still bent forehead was not cleared, yet this her passion's throes brought forth in spite, being lately schooled. Alas, what fools are we, that envy Jove, but that by act, word, thought can fantasy any resistance to his will. He sits far off, nor cares, nor moves, but stays, his grace to all degrees compares. His greatness past all other gods, and that in fortitude and every other godlike power he reigns past all endued. For which great eminence all you gods, whatever he does, sustain with patience here as Mars, I think not free from woes, and yet he bears them like himself. That great god had a son, whom he himself yet justifies, one that from all men won, just surname of their best beloved, Ascalaphus, yet he, by Jove's high grace, to Troy is slain. Mars started horribly, as Juno knew he would, at this, beat with his hurled out hands, brawny thighs, he cried out, and said, O you that have commands in these high temples, bear with me if I revenge the death of such a son. I'll to the fleet, and though I sink beneath the fate of being shot to hell by Jove's fell thunderstone, and lie all grimmed amongst the dead with dust and blood, my son revenge shall honour. Then he charged, fear and dismay, to join his horse and chariot. He got arms that over heaven did shine, and then a wrath more great and grave than Jove had been prepared against the god that Juno caused, if Pallas had not cared. More for the peace of heaven, Mars, who leapt out of her throne, wrapped up her helmet, lance, and shield, and made her fame's porch groan. With her a Grecian to his stay, and thus his rage defers, furious and foolish thou'rt undone. Hast therefore not thine ears? Heardst thou not Juno being arrived from heaven's great king but now, or wouldst thou he himself should rise, forced with thy anger to show? Dreadful power she urged in him, so justly being stirred, know thou must impudent and mad, thy wrath had not inferred mischief to thee, but to us all. His spirit had instantly left both the hosts and turned his hands to uproars in the sky. Guilty and guiltless both to wrack in his high rage had gone, and therefore, as thou lovest thyself, cease fury for thy son. Another far exceeding him in heart and strength of hand, or is or will be shortly slain. Yet what a work would stand Jove in much trouble to free all from death that would not die. His threaten even nailed him to his throne, when heaven's chief majesty called bright Apollo from his fane, and Iris that had place of Internancius from gods, to whom she did the grace of Jupiter to this effect. It is Saturnius' will that both the utmost speed should stop to the Idalian hill. To know his further pleasure there, and this let me advise, when you arrive and I are in reach of his refulgent eyes, his pleasure heard, perform it all of whatsoever kind. Thus moved she back and used her throne. Those two outstripped the wind. And Ida all enchased with springs they soon attained and found, where far discerning Jupiter in his repose had crowned the brows of Gargarus, unwrapped in odoriferous cloud about his bosom. Coming near they stood, nor now he showed his angry countenance, since so soon he saw that he made the access that his loved wife enjoined. But first the fair ambassadress he thus commanded, Iris, go to Neptune and relate our pleasure truly and at large. Command him from the fate of human war, and either greet the gods' society or the divine sea, make his seat, if proudly he deny, that better counsels be his guide. Then such as bid me war, tempt me charge, though he be strong, for I am stronger far, and elder born, nor let him dare to boast, even state with me, whom all gods else prefer and fear. This said, down hasted she from Ida's top to Ilion, and like a mighty snow, or gelid hail, from the clouds the northern spirit doth blow, so fell the windy-footed dame, and found, with quick repair, the watery god, to whom she said, God with the sable hair, I came from Aegis bearing Jove, to bid thee cease from fight, and visit heaven or the ample seas, which if in his despite or disobedience thou deniest, he threatens thee to come in opposite fight to field himself, and therefore warns thee home, his hands eschewing, since his powers is far superior. His birth before thee and affirms thy love heart should abhor, to vaunt equality with him, whom every deity fears. He answered, O unworthy thing, though he be great, he bears his tongue too proudly, that ourselves, born to an equal share of state and freedom, he would force. 3 brothers born we are. To Saturn, Rhea, brought us forth, this Jupiter and I, and Pluto, god of undergrounds. The world indifferently disposed betwixt us, every one his kingdom, I the seas, Pluto, black plot, Jupiter the principalities. Broad heaven, all the sky and clouds were sorted out, the earth and high Olympus common are, and due to either's birth. Why then should I be awed by him? Content he is, great heart, with his third portion, and not think to amplify his part with terrors of stronger hands on me, as if I were the most ennoble of us all. Let him contain in fear his daughters and his sons, begot by his own person. This holds more convenience they must hear these violent threats of his. Shall I, said Iris, bear from thee an answer so austere? Or wilt thou change it, changing minds all noble natures bear? And well thou know'st, these greatest born the Furies follow still. He answered, Iris, thy reply keeps time and shows thy skill. It is a praiseworthy thing when messengers can tell, besides their messages, such things that fit the occasion well. But this much grieves my heart and soul, that being in power and state always is equal, and so fixed by one decree and fate, he should to me as under him ill language gave and chide, yet now, though still incensed, I yield, affirming this beside, and I enforce it with a threat, that if it without consent of me, Minerva, Mercury, the queen of regiment, and Vulcan, he will either spare high Ilion, or not race her turrets to the lodestone, and with both these, not grace, the Greeks as victors absolute, infirm him this from me, his pride and my contempt shall live at endless enmity. This said, he left the Greeks, and rushed into his watery throne, much missed of all the heroic host. When Jove discerned him gone, Apollo's service he employed, and said, "Up, Phoebus, go to Hector now. The earth-shaking god hath taken sea, and so shrunk from the horrors I denounced, which standing he and all the under-seated deities that circle Saturn's fall had heard of me in such a fight as had gone hard for them. But both for them and me 'tis best that thus they fly th' extreme. That had not passed us without sweat. Now then in thy hands take my adder-fringed affrighting shield, which with such terror shake, that fear may shake the Greeks to flight. Besides this add thy care, O Phoebus, far-off shooting god, that this so sickly fair a famous Hector be recurred, and quickly so excite his amplest powers, that all the Greeks may grace him with their flight, even to their ships and Hellespont. Then will I advise all words and facts again for Greece, that largely may suffice to breathe them from their instant toils. Thus, from the Idaean's height, like Air's swift pigeon killer stooped the far-shot god of light. Found the great Hector sitting up, not stretched upon his bed, not wheezing with a stopped-up spirit, not in cold sweats, but fed with fresh, comfortable veins. But his mind all his own, but round about him all his friends as well was ever known, and this was with the mind of Jove that flew to him before Apollo came, who, as he saw no sign of any sore and light, a cheerful visitant, why in this sickly kind, great Hector, sitst thou so apart? Can any grief of mind invade thy fortitude? He spake, but with a feeble voice. O thou the best of deities, why since I thus rejoice? By thy so serious benefit demand'st thou as in mirth to my face, as if I were ill. For more than what thy worth must needs take note of, doth not fame from all mouths fill thine ears, that as my hand at the Achaia fleet was making massacres of men, and whom valiant Ajax led, his strength struck with a stone all power of more hurt from my breast. His very soul was gone, and once today I thought to see the house of Death and Death. Be strong, said he, for such a spirit now sends the god of breath from airy Ida, as shall run through all Greek spirits in thee. Apollo with the golden sword. The Clephar, seer, see, him who betwixt death and thy life, twixt ruin and those towers, ere this day oft hath held his shield, come then be all thy powers. In wonted vigour let thy knights with all their horse essay, the Grecian fleet myself will lead, and score so clear the way, that flight shall leave no Greek a rub. Thus instantly inspired, for all his nerves with matchless strength, and then his friends he fired against their foes, when to his eyes his ears confirmed the god. Then as a goodly heated hart, or goat bred in the wood, a rout country huntsmen chase with all their hounds, and cry the beast, yet o'er the shady woods or rocks excessive high, keep safe for our unwieldy fates that even in hunters sway, bar them from the poor beasts pulling down, when straight from the clamorous fray calls out a lion, hugely maned, with his abhorred view, turns headlong in unturning flight, though venturous all the crew. So hitherto the chasing Greeks their slaughter dealt by troops, but after Hector was beheld, a range here and there. Then stoops the boldest courage, then their heels took in their drooping hearts, and then spake Andromenides, man of far best parts of all the Aetolians, skilled in darts, strenuous in fights of stand, and one of whom few of the Greeks could get the better hand, for rhetoric when they fought with words. With all which, being wise, thus spake he to his Grecian friends, O mischief, now mine eyes discern no little miracle, Hector escaped from death, nor recovered, when all thought his soul and sunk beneath the hands of Ajax. But some god hath saved and freed again him that but now dissolved the knees of many a Grecian, and now I fear will weaken more. For not without the hand of him that thunders can his powers thus still the force that I fight stand, thus still triumphant. Hear me then, our troops in quick retreat, let's draw up to our feet, and we that boast ourselves the great stand firm, and try of these that raise so high their charging darts may be resisted. I believe even this great heart of arts will fear himself to be too bold in charging thorough us. They easily heard him and obeyed when all the generous they called and countered Hector's charge and turned to the common men, back to the fleet. And these were they that bravely furnished then the fierce forefight, the Ajaxes both, the worthy Cretan king, the Mars-like Meges, Merion, and Teucer. Up then bring the Trojans, the chief, their men in heaps, before whom amply paced marched Hector, and in front of him Apollo, who had cast about his bright aspect a cloud. Did before him bear Jove's huge, each wearing shaggy shield, which to contain in fear offending men the godsmith gave to Jove. With this he led the Trojan forces. The Greeks stood, a fervent clamour spread the air on both sides as they joined. Out flew the shafts and darts, some falling short, but some found butts and breasts and hearts. As long as Phoebus held but out his horrid shield, so long as the darts flew ranging either way, and death grew both ways strong. But when the Greeks had seen his face, and who it was that shook the bristled targe, knew by his voice then all their strengths forsook their nerves and minds. And then look, how a goodly herd of neat or wealthy flock of sheep, being close and dreadless at their meat, some black midnight suddenly do not a keeper near, a brace of horrid bears rush in, and then fly here and there, poor affrighted flocks or herds so everywhere dispersed, the heartless Grecians, so the sun their headstrong chase reversed, the headlong flight, that day raised with all grace Hector's head. Arcesilaus then he slew, and Stichius led, Boetius brazen-coated men. The other was a friend of mighty souled Menestheus. Aeneas brought to end Medon and Jasus. Medon was the brother, though not base, of swift Iliad, and dwelt far from his breeding place in Phylake. The other led the Athenian bands, his sire was Spelus, Proclus' son. Menestheus did expire beneath Polydamas' hand. Polites Echius slew, just as the joining of the hosts Agenor overthrew Clonius. Bold Deacus felt Alexander's lance. It struck his shoulder up apart, and did his head advance quite through his breast. Far from flight, he turned for retreat. While these stood spoiling of the slain, the Greeks found time to get beyond the dike, and the undiked pales all scape they gladly gained. Till all had passed the utmost wall, necessity so reigned. Hector cried out, take no spoil, but rush into the fleet, from whose assault, for spoil or flight, if any man I meet, he meets his death, nor in the fire of holy funeral. His brothers or sisters' hands shall cast within our wall his loathed body, but without the throats of dogs shall grave his manless limbs. This said the scourge. His forward horses drave, through every order, and with him all whipped their chariots on. All threateningly our thundering shouts, as earth were overthrown, before them marched Apollo still. And as he marched, digged down without all labour with his feet the dike, till with his own he filled it to the top, and made way both for man and horse, as broad and long as with a lance cast out to try one's force. A man could measure. Into this they poured whole troops as fast as numerous. Phoebus still before, for all their haste, still striking Jove's unvalued shield, and held it up to all. Then, as he had choked their dike, he tumbled down their all. And look how easily any boy upon the sea-ebbed shore makes with a little stand a toy, and cares for it no more. But as he raised it childishly, so in his wanton vein, both with his hands and feet he pulls and spurns it down again. So slight, O Phoebus, thy hand made of that huge Grecian toil, and ere late stand, so well resolved as easily maxed with coil. Thus stood they, driven up at their feet, where each heard's other's thoughts, exhorted, passing, humbly prayed, all gods, those Greeks besought. With hands that held up to heaven for help, mongst all the good old man, grave Nestor, for his counsels, called the Argives' guardian, fell on his aged knees and prayed, and to the starry host stretched out his hands, for aid to theirs, for all us moving most. O Father Jove, if ever man of all our host did burn fat thighs of oxen or of sheep for grace of safe return in fruitful Argos, and obtain the bowing of thy head, the promise of his humble prayers, now remember him. Thou merely heavenly and cleared up the foul brows of his dim and cruel day, do not destroy our zeal for Trojan pride. He prayed, and heaven's great counsellor with store of thunder tried his former grace good, and so he heard the old man's hearty prayers, yes. The Trojans took Jove's signs for them and poured out their affairs, and much more violence on the Greeks, and thought on naught but fight. And as a huge wave of a sea swollen in the rudest height breaks over the bow, both sides of a ship, being all urged by the wind, for that's its make the wave so proud, and such a borne-up kind, the Trojans overgat the wall, and getting on their horse fought close at feet, which now the Greeks ascended for their force. Then from their chariots they with darts, the Greeks with bed hooks fought, kept still aboard their naval fights, their heads with iron wrought, in hooks and pikes Achilles' friend, still while he saw the wall that stood without their fleet, forward employment for them all, was never absent from the tent of that man-looking Greek, late hurt Eurypylus, but sate and every way did seek to spend the sharp time of his wound with all the ease he could, in medicines and in kind discourse. But when he might behold the Trojans pass the wall, the Greeks flight driven, and all in cries, then he cried out, cast down his hands, and beat with grief his thighs. Then, O Eurypylus, he cries, now all thy need of me must bear my absence. Now a work of more necessity calls hence, and I must haste to call Achilles to the field. Who knows but God assisting me, my words may make him yield. The motion of a friend is strong. His feet thus took him thence. The rest yet stood their enemies firm, but all their violence, though Troy fought there with fewer men, lacked vigor to repel. Those fewer from the navy's charge, and so that charge as well, lacked force to spoil their fleet or tents. As a shipwright's line disposed by such a hand as learned from the artisan divine, the perfect practice of his art directs or guards so well the naval timber then in frame, that all the laid-on steel can hew no further than may serve to give the timber the end. For a purpose by the skillful right, so both hosts did contend, with such a line or law applied to what their steel would gain. Other ships fought other men, but Hector did maintain his quarrel firm at Ajax's ship. So did both employ about one vessel all their toil, nor could the one destroy the ship with fire, nor the force the man, nor that man yet get gone, the other from so near his ship, for God had brought him on. But now did Ajax with a dart wound deadly in the breast Calator, son of Clytius, as he with fire addressed to burn the vessel. As he fell, the brand fell from his hand. When Hector saw his sister's son lie slaughtered in the sand, he called to all his friends and prayed they would not in that strait forsake his nephew, but maintain about his course the fight. Save it from the spoil of Greece. Then sent he out a lance at Ajax in his nephew's wreck, which missed but made the chance on Lycophron Mastorides, that was the household friend of Ajax, born in Cythera, whom Ajax did defend, being fled to his protection for killing of a man amongst the godlike Cytherans. The vengeful javelin ran quite through his head, above his ear, as he was standing by, as fortor then astern his ship, from whence his soul did fly, and to the earth his body fell. The hair stood up an end on Ajax, who to Teucer called his brother, saying, Friend, our loved consort whom we brought from Cythera is graced, so like our father Hector's hand hath made him breathe his last. Where then are thy death-born shafts? And that unvalued bow Apollo gave thee. Choicer straight his brother's thoughts did know, stood near him and dispatched a shaft against the Trojan fight. It struck Pisenor's godly son, young Clytius, the delight of the renowned Polydamas, the bridle in his hand, as he was labouring his horse to please the high command of Hector and his Trojan friends, and bring him where the fight made greatest tumult. But his strife for honour in their sight wrought not what sight or wishes helped, for turning back his look, the hollow of his neck the shaft came singing on and struck. Down he fell, his horse back, and hurried through the field. The empty chariot Panthus' son made all haste, and withheld their loose career, disposing them to Patrion's son, Stinus, with special charge to keep them ever on and in his sight. And so he again amongst the foremost went, and Hector and another shaft insensate Teucer sent, which had it hit him surely had hurt, and had hurt him slain, and had it slain him had driven all those to Troy again. But Jove's mind was not sleeping now. It waked to Hector's fame, and Teucer's infamy, himself and Teucer's deadly aim, his well-wrought string of disserving that served his bravest bow. His shaft flew quite another way, his bow the earth did strow. At all which Teucer stood amazed. To his brother cried, "Prodigy! That all doubt our angel doth deride the counsels of our fight. He brake a string my hands put on this morning, and was newly made, and well might have set gone. 100 arrows, and beside he struck out of my hand the bow Apollo gave." He said, "Then, good friend, do not stand more than thy archery, since God, preventer of all grace, desired by Grecians slights it so. Take therefore in the place a good large lance, and on thy neck a target cast as bright, with which come fight thyself with some, and other some excite, that without labour at the least, though we prove worser men, Troy may not braggart to took our ships. Come, mind our business then." This said, he hasted to his tent, left there his shafts and bow, and then his double shield did on his shoulders throw. Upon his honoured head he placed his helmet thickly plumed, and his strong and well-piled lance in his fair hand assumed, returned and boldly took his place by his great brother's side. When Hector saw his arrows broke out to his friends, he cried, "Friends, be yet more comforted. I saw the hands of Jove break the great Grecian archer's shafts. 'Tis easy to approve that Jove powers is direct with men, as well in those set high upon the sudden, as in those depressed as suddenly, and those not put in state at all. As now he takes away strength from the Greeks, gives it to us, then use it, and essay, with joined hands, this approached fleet. If any bravely buy his fame or fate with wounds or death in Jove's name, let him die. Before his country suffers death, sustains no shameful thing. His wife in honour shall survive, his progeny shall spring in endless summers, and their roofs with patrimony swell, and all this though with all their freight, the Greek ships will we repel." His friends thus cheered. On the other part, strong Ajax stirred his friends. "Greeks," said he, "what shame is this, that no man more defends his fame and safety than to live and thus be forced to shrink? Now either save your fleet or die, unless ye vainly think that you can live. They destroyed, perceives not every ear how Hector hardens up his men and hath his firebrands here, now ready to inflame our fleet. It doth not bide them dance, that you may take your ease and see, but to the fight advance. No counsel can serve this. To mix both hands and hearts and bear up close, 'tis better much to expose our utmost parts to one day's certain life or death than languish in a war so base as this, beat to our ships by our inferiors far. Thus roused he up the spirits and strengths. To work then both sides went, when Hector the Vicentian Duke to fields of darkness sent fierce Schedius, Perimedes' son, with Ajax did requite with slaughter of Laodamas, that led the foot to fight, and was Antenor's famous son. Polydamas did end Otus, surnamed Calenius, whom Phedas made his friend, being chief to the Epean bands, whose fall when Meges viewed, he let fly at his fellow's life, who shrinking in eschewed the well-aimed lance Apollo's will, denied that Panthus' son should fall. Amongst the foremost fights, the dart the mid-breast won. Of Crasmus, Meges won his arms, at Meges Dolops then bestowed those lance. He was the son of Lampus best of men, and Lampus of Laomedons, well skilled in the strength of mind. He struck Philetus' shield quite through, whose cuirass better lined, and hollow fitly saved his life. Phileus left him then, who from Epirus brought them home on that part where the stream of famous Selaus doth run. Euphetes did bestow, being guest with him, those well-proved arms to wear against the foe, and now they saved his son from death. At Dolops Meges threw a spear well piled that struck this casque in full in height, or flew his purple feather newly made, and then in dust it fell. While these thus strive for victory, and either hope served well, Atrides came to Meges' aid, and hidden with his side let loose a javelin at his foe, that through his back implied his lusty head, even past his breast. The ground received his weight. While these made into spoils his arms great Hector did excite all his allies to quick revenge, and first he wrought upon strong Menelaus, that was son sent great Hecatoon. With some reproof before these wars he in Percote fed, cloven-footed oxen, but did since return where he was bred. Excelled amongst the Ilians, was much a Priam loved, and in his court kept as his son. Him Hector thus reproved, thus Menelaus. Shall our blood accuse us of neglect, nor moves it thy loved heart, thus urge thy kinsmen to protect? Seest thou not how they seek and spoil? Come, follow. Now no more our fight must stand at length, but close. Nor leave the close before we close the latest eye of them, or they the lowest stone tear up and suck the citizens of lofty Ilion. He led. He followed like a god. Then must Ajax needs, as well as Hector, cheer his men, and thus their spirits he feeds. Good friends, bring but yourselves to feel the noble stings of shame. For what ye suffer, and be men, respect each other's fame, for which who strives in shame's fit fear, and puts on ne'er so far, comes off, ne'er off. Then stick engaged these fugitives of war, save neither life, nor get renown, nor bear more mind than sheep. This short speech fired them in his aid. The spirit touched them deep, and turned them all before the fleet into a wall of brass, to whose assault Jove stirred their foes, and young Atreus was Jove's instrument, who thus set on the young Antilochus. Antilochus, in all our host there is not one of us, more young than thou, more swift of foot, nor with both those so strong. Would thou wouldst then, for thou canst, one of this lusty throng, that thus comes skipping out of before, whoever anywhere, make stick for my sake, twixt both hosts, and leave his bold blood there. He said no sooner and retired, but forth he rushed before the foremost fighters, yet his eye did everywhere way explore. For dad of odds, out flew his lance, the Trojans did abstain, while he was darting, yet his dart he cast off not in vain, for Menelaus, that rare son of great Hecatoon, bravely he put forth to fight, it fiercely flew upon. That the nipple of his breast and life did part. And then much like an eager hound his cast off some young heart, hurt by the hunter that had led his covert then but knew. The great in war Antilochus, O Menelaus, flew on thy torn bosom for thy spoil. But thy death could not lie hid to great Hector, who all haste made to thee, and made fly Antilochus, although in war he war at all parts skilled. But as some wild beast, having done some shrewd turn, either killed the herdsman or the herdsman's dog, skulks away before, and gather multitude makes in, so Nestor's son forbore. But after him with horrid cries both Hector and the rest, showers of tear-thirsty lances poured, who having armed his breast with all his friends he turned it then on the ships all Troy, like raw-fleshed nourished lions, rushed, and knew they did employ their powers to perfect Jove's high will, who still their spirits inflamed, and quenched the Grecians, one renowned, the other often shamed. For Hector's glory still he stood, and ever went about, to make him cast a fleet such fire as never should go out. Heard Thetis' foul petition, and wished in any wise the splendour of the burning ships might satiate his eyes. From him yet the repulse was then to be on Troy confirmed, the honour of it given the Greeks. Which thinking on he stirred, but such addition of his spirits the spirit Hector bore, to burn the fleet, that of itself was hot enough before. But now he fared like Mars himself, so brandishing his lance, so the deep shades of a wood a raging fire should glance, held up to all eyes by a hill about his lips of foam, stood as when the ocean is enraged, his eyes were overcome with fervour, resembled flames, set off by his dark brows. And from his temples his bright helm poured lightnings throws, for Jove them forth the sphere of stars to his state put his own, and all the blaze of both the hosts confined in him alone. And all this was, since, after he had not long to live, this lightning flew before his death, which Pallas was to give, small time thence, and now prepared, beneath the violence of great Pelides. In meantime his present eminence thought all things under it, and he still where he saw the stands of great strength, bravest arm, that he would prove his hands, or nowhere. offering to break through, but that past all his power, although his will were past all theirs, they stood him like a tower, conjoined so firm that as a rock exceeding high and great, and standing near the hoary sea, bears many a boisterous threat. High-voiced winds, billowing huge, belched on it by the storms, so stood the Greeks great Hector's charge, nor stirred their battleless forms. He girt in fire born for the fleet, still rushed at every troop, and fell upon it like a wave high raised that then doth stoop out from the clouds, grows as it stoops with storms, and down doth come and cuff a ship when all her sides are hid in breakish foam, strong gales still raging in her sails, the sailors' minds dismayed. Death being but little from their lives, so Jove like Hector frayed, and plied the Greeks who knew not what chance for all their guards, and as the baneful king of beasts he leapt into the oxen herds, fed in the meadows of the fen, exceeding great the beasts in number infinite, mongst whom their herdsmen, wanting breasts to fight with lions for the price of a black ox's life. He there and there jumps, first and last in his bloodthirsty strife, chased and assaulted, and at length down into the mist goes on. And all the rest burst through the fen, so now all Greece was gone. So Hector in a flight from heaven upon the Grecians cast, turned all their backs, yet only one his deadly lance laid fast. Brave Mecaeus Periphas, Cypraeus' dearest son, while the heaven-queen loved king great Eurystheus won. The graced Grecian embassy, the strength of Hercules was far superior to his sire in feat, fight, nobleness. All the virtues, and all those did such a wisdom guide as all Mecaena could not match, and this man dignified, still making greater his renown with the state of Priam's son. For his unhappy hasty foot, as he addressed to run, stuck in the extremest ring of his shield, to his ankles reached. Down he upwards fell his fall, up from the centre fetched, a huge sound with his head and helm, which Hector quickly spied, ran in, and in his worthy breast his lance's head did hide. Slew about him all his friends who could not give him aid. They grieved, and of his godlike foe fled so extreme afraid. And now amongst the nearest ships that first were drawn to shore, the Greeks were driven, beneath whose sides behind them and before, and into them they poured themselves, and thence were driven again, up to their tents. There they stood, not daring to maintain their gods more outward, but betwixt the bounds of fear and shame, cheered still each other. When the old man, that a part of the Grecian name, was called the Pillar, every man thus by his parents prayed. Though friends be men, and in your minds let others' shame be weighed, know you have friends besides yourselves, possessions, parents, wives, as well as those that are the dead to you, as those ye love with lives, all sharing still their good or bad with yours. Be by these I pray, that are not present, and the more should therefore make ye way. Their miss of you, as yours of them, that you will bravely stand, and this forced flight you have sustained at length. Your countermand supplies the goods, words thus supplied the deeds and spirits of all. So at last Minerva cleared the cloud that Jove let fall. Before their eyes a mighty light flew beaming every way, as well about their ships as where the darts did hottest play. Then saw they Hector great in arms and his associates, as well all those that then abstained as those that helped the fates, and all their own fight at the fleet. Nor did they now contend Ajax to keep it down like the rest. He up the hatches went, stalked here, there. In his hand a huge, great bead hook held, 12 cubits long and full of iron, and as a man well skilled in horse made to the martial race, when of a number more he chooseth 4, and brings them forth to run them all before swarms of admiring citizens amidst their town's highway, and in their full career he leaps from one to one, no stay, enforced on any, nor fails he in either seat or leap. So Ajax, with his bead hook, leaped nimbly from ship to ship, as actively commanding all them in their men, as well as men in them, most terribly exhorting to repel, to save their navy and their tents. But Hector nothing needs to stand an exhortation now at home, he strives for deeds. And look how Jove's great queen of birds, sharp set, look out for prey, knows floods that nourish wild-winged fowls, and from her airy way beholds where cranes, swans, cormorants have made their footy fall. Darkens the river with her wings, and stoops amongst them all. So Hector flew amongst the Greeks, directing his command in chief against one opposite ship, Jove with a mighty hand still backing him and all his men. And then again there grew a bitter conflict at the fleet. You would have said none drew a wary breath, nor ever would they laid so freshly on. This was that third them both the Greeks did build upon, no hope but what the field would yield. Flight, an impossible course. The Trojans all hope entertained that sword and fire should force both ships and lives of all the Greeks, and thus, unlike effects, bred like strenuity in both. Great Hector still directs his powers against the first near ship. 'Twas that fair break that brought Protesilaus to those wars, and now herself to naught, with many Greek and Trojan lives all spoiled about her spoil. One slew another desperately, and close the deadly toil was pitched on both parts. Not a shaft nor far-off striking dart was used through all. One fight fell out of one despiteful heart. Sharp axes, twibbles, two-hand swords, and spears with two heads borne. Or then the weapons, fair short swords, with sanguine hilts still worn, had use in like sort, of which last ye might have numbers viewed, drop with dissolved arms from their hands, as many downright hewed. From all their shoulders as they fought, their baldricks cut in twain, and thus the black blood flowed on earth from soldiers hurt and slain. When Hector once had seized the ship, he clapped his fair broad hand fast on the stern, and held it there, and there gave this command: "Bring fire!" and all together shout. Now Jove had drawn the veil from such a day as makes amends for all his storms of hail, by whose blessed light we take those ships that in despite of heaven took sea and brought us worlds of woe, all since our peers were given to such a laziness and fear they would not let me end our lingering banes and charge us home, but keep home and defend, and so they ruled the men I led, but through Jove then withheld. My natural spirit now by Jove's 'tis freed, and thus impelled. This more inflamed them, and so much that Ajax now no more kept up. He was so drowned in darts, a little he forbore the hatches to a seat beneath of 7 foot long, but thought it was impossible to scape. He sat yet where he fought, and hurled out lances thick as hail at all men that essayed to fire the ship with whom he fought, his hands so overlaid that on his shoulders thus he cried: "Friends, fight I alone? Expect ye more? Walls at our backs, towns repaired? Here are none, no citizens to take ye in, no help of any kind. We are, I tell you, in Troy's fields, have naught but seas behind, and foes before, far, far from Greece. For shame they obey commands. There is no mercy in the wars, your health lies in your hands." Thus raged he, and poured out his darts. Whoever he espied come near the vessel, armed with fire, on his fierce dart he died. All that was pleased Hector made him mad. All that his thanks would earn, of which 12 men, his most resolved, lay dead before his stern.